Hello and welcome to ZSL Science Careers videos. My name is Holly and I am a Senior Learning Officer at ZSL. ZSL, for those of you who don't know, stands for the Zoological Society of London, and we are the international conservation charity that runs both ZSL London Zoo and ZSL Whipsnade Zoo. So thank you for joining us. This week I am joined by Dr. Nathalie Pettorelli, who is a Senior Research Fellow at ZSL's Institute of Zoology, and someone who, contrary to our previous scientists, studies biological diversity on a much larger scale. So it'd be wonderful, Nathalie, if you could just start us off by sort of introducing us to your research. What do you study? What do you spend your days doing?
So the quickest way to define what I do is that I like to be useful. So I tend to get interested by a lot of topics, and when it catch my interest, then I try to help given the problem at hand. I do a lot of work trying to help species and ecosystem do better, or being well conserved, or either identify the one that need help. One of the specificity of what I do is that I like to use satellite data. So I like to see whether you can use the information collected by that technology to help inform conservation. So I have one or two examples here to show what it looks like. For example, here, and this is a picture taken by a satellite that allow you to see the degradation that is done by livestock in protected area. So the little point, or the point you see in the middle that looks like a crater, is actually a water hole that has been an artificial one or made by people. And all the little lines that you see going in and out are the path of the livestock going in and out to the water point. So that kind of technology allows you to see how many of those points have been digged and what kind of impact it has on the ecosystem that you're looking at. So the
Where in the world? Where in the world was this water?
This was in Chad.
In Chad.
In an area where ZSL works and have been helping reintroduce scimitar oryx. And so this was some work to try to see what kind of degradation is happening in that environment. As you know, reintroduction can cost a lot of money. And so you want to see how the habitat is doing before bringing back the animals. So here we were looking at the impact of pastoralists and livestock going in that game reserve and how much it had an impact on the ecosystem.
Because that reserve, I think I'm right in saying it's about 4 times the size of Wales, the reserve that they've been used to. So I suppose to study the impact of something of farmers on that kind of huge area, satellites are a great way.
Yeah. The good thing with satellites that they allow you to see very vast area quickly. So you would have a lot of problem deploying that many people to get the same type of information in the field. And also they allow you to look at spaces that are difficult to access, either because it's dangerous or there's no road, or it's quite remote. So when you want to have a bird eye view of the world to try to inform your next step in conservation, satellite data, which provide free information, provides a really good first step to plan your action. Another big example as to how satellite data can be used is to track deforestation. So this is not a satellite picture, this is just a high view of deforestation in the Amazon, but that really helps you see the difference in reflection. So how the surface of the planet look like when it has been deforested. As you see, it goes from really dark green to really bright orange, and this is something that you can track from space easily, and therefore provide some information about illegal logging, for example, or the speed at which we are losing the rainforest. So there's many more examples, and the type of work I do is to try to see what else can you do with this satellite information.
And who are the satellites? You're saying that's free data. Why are these satellites up there? Who do they belong to?
So they belong to primarily to government. So NASA has been putting a lot of satellite around the Earth. The European Space Agency, JAXA, the Japanese, India, Brazil. So a lot of nations have deployed satellite to look at the Earth. And some of those space agencies have made the information free for research, actually free to everyone in the case of NASA. So these images can be, anyone can access them through the web and then look at them and analyze them to try to gather information about the environment.
And so how does that translate then to your day-to-day life? What do you spend your time doing?
Most of my time nowadays, I spend my time in front of a computer analyzing data and responding to email and doing a lot of admin work as well as research work and writing work. The good thing is that it's not always like that. So from time to time, I still do some field work. This was a bit earlier in my career, but going in the field, this was before I started to really play with satellite data. As you can see, I have one of those old GPS in my hand, trying to find a location with a map and a GPS and getting quite lost. It's also brought me to some incredible places in Quebec, where I was, you had to go by a small plane, and then that was the plane in question to access really remote island full of wildlife. It was actually an interesting island, that one, because it's one of the only occasions where an ungulate, so a herbivore, drove an omnivore to extinction. So there was so many white-tailed deer on that island that the black bear got extinct on that island.
Wow.
Yeah, so it can happen.
It never happens that way around. That's amazing.
And then it got me in the Serengeti, of course, so working with various colleagues at the Institute, working on cheetahs, so helping a large carnivore conservation, so going around looking for cheetah and gazelle, and sometimes even get you into holding some bears. And so this is doing some work in the US, visiting actually a PhD student, and we ended up into a rescue center where they had a black bear female with cubs, so you end up handling cool animal. But if I'm not in front of a computer, where I spend a lot of my time is either teaching or doing presentation about what ZSL does, what we do, what I do, or a lot of meeting, which gets you into really cool place. So here, for example, got me into Parliament to try to talk about wildlife conservation.
Amazing.
So a very diverse set of location. The more you get into, the more you do this job, the more you get into all kind of places. So you never get bored. There's no routine.
A lot of what you do, you seem to spend a lot of time talking about your science, sort of science communication, and I know that's quite a big passion of yours in terms of sort of communicating your work and everyone's work to a wider audience. And I wonder if you could just touch a little bit on that, because I know that you, many years ago, Soapbox Science was something that you had a hand in founding, wasn't it?
That's right. I think it all started with the fact that it took me 18 years to know that my job existed. So no one in my family never went to university, and no one was a scientist, and I was a working class family. And the only chance was that I was raised in France, where education was free. So I could continue to do university and explore by being paid by the government to do so, as long as I had good grades. And up until 18, I had no idea that you could be a scientist as of not someone with a white coat closed up in a lab doing experiments, but actually going around, seeing the world, doing things that I really enjoyed. And then I realized, as I became a scientist and started to do my job, that there was very little discussion as to what science was about. It was when we started Soapbox Science, the image of a scientist was very much an old guy in a white coat. And so I got quite interested in trying to broaden the perception of what a scientist is and what a scientist does. Because not all of us are enclosed in labs. Not all of us find chemistry really impressive. I mean, there is so much diversity in the term of in the type of personality that you find in science. So it would be nice to create an event that open up those doors, and that's how Soapbox started. Admittedly, we were also very interested in opening up the door for girls to realize that there are girls doing science and they are not all weird. so as of that, this is a profession that suits well girls as well as boys, as no yeah, don't need to be a certain type to do science.
Yeah, and Safe Book Science, it started off in one location as a sort of public engagement activity, women, female scientists going out onto the streets and sort of taking opportunity to almost sort of preach their science to passers-by, and it's grown to quite a big thing now, hasn't it?
Oh yeah, if we didn't have a lockdown and a pandemic, we would be in all continents this year. And so we are over 50 events now internationally. It has grown well because I don't think the women preach. They just talk about what they do, and the beauty is that it's outside. You don't pay to attend. It's completely free. If you want to stay 1 minute, you stay 1 minute. If you want to stay more, you stay more. So you have the fluidity and the flexibility to just listen, and if it doesn't interest you, you move to something else, and if it's not something for you, then you just go, you don't stay. But the point is that you have direct access, so it isn't a nice polished version made for people that are interested in science. It's a version accessible to all, with the primary aim to try to engage people that thinks that science is boring, so to show a different aspect of what's going on in the scientific world. What kind of question do we tackle? And I think we spend a lot of time making sure that there's a diversity of topics. So it's not just physics or maths or ecology, it's all of them. So that if you're interested in medicine and psychology, if you're interested in how your Oyster card work, or how to improve in vitro fertilization, there's, cover a huge range of topics, so that there's always a hook for someone to listen a bit.
Yeah, showing, I suppose, like you say, it took you a long time to realize that your job existed, so putting that diversity of topics and interests out there to try and get people hooked is a good thing. When did you realize then that you wanted to be a scientist?
As a kid, I was always interested in everything. My dad always, so the deal was that if I wasn't bad at anything in particular, I was out of trouble, and my whole approach to school was getting out of trouble. So if I had good marks at more or less everything, I could more or less do other stuff without having too much trouble. And so I ended up being quite interested in everything. So not a specialist, but a generalist. And then when I started to say that actually I also like science, so I took an A-level in science. I remember my mother and grandmother didn't understand why you would want to stay in school anyway. And my dad just thought that science, maybe I should not do science. Am I really a scientist? And so I started off by going the wrong way, by doing register in university level at business, and I stayed 1 month because after a month I couldn't handle it anymore, and then I rushed and registered to biology, because if I had to take a snap decision, that's what I chose. And quickly I realized that this science approach, where a biology, but with a bit of physics, with a bit of chemistry, which in France, that's how you get educated the first year in university. You keep all the science together. Was really something I liked. And then I met that PhD student at one of the practical that basically explained me what she was doing and what was her job like. And then from then on, I said, that's what I want to do. And then I started to explore what were the options, and then slowly moved there. But I think this idea that I could be in charge of what I do, so I did like the idea of not having no boss. This idea that you're responsible for the outcome that you generate, as of so huge accountability, but also a huge reward, personal reward when you achieve something. And then this idea that you can travel and you mix different disciplines together. So when you do conservation, it involves geography, it involves history, it involves social sciences, as well as biology, physics. So there's a lot of science coming together to do conservation. And so, I fell in love with that, with this innovations through interdisciplinarity. Yeah.
What then has been the most memorable part of your career so far? If you had to pick one moment, what would it be?
I had this question to us every time. I find it really difficult. I think the first time I went to the Serengeti was a big moment for me, because I watched, like many people, and it was in France too, the David Attenborough filming the Masai Mara and the Serengeti. So being myself able to get there, knowing that no one in my family ever got there and that I just never thought I would make it there, was really big for me. Especially because I was alone on that plane. I arrived over there. Everything was the first time I went to the Serengeti was the first time I effectively went to Africa. So it was a big thing for me. But then, likewise, the first time I ended up at NASA, so I ended up in Washington visiting some colleagues to work on project, and entering the green belt campus and really looking at the technology and what people are doing out there was actually mind-blowing. So but those two, yeah, definitely. I find it difficult to choose between those two because there were two big moments for me.
Yeah, no, definitely, that's fantastic. And I suppose the fact that you're working so closely with NASA and scientists, that people probably would not think that biologists from the UK are working alongside physicists, from the US to do conservation. It's a really kind of nice message and a nice story to be able to tell how diverse conservation is in terms of the topics it can involve.
Well, and it is also important to realize that you move from one discipline to another. So there are famous examples of scientists that were trained as mathematicians and then became ecologists, physicists that became conservationists. I mean, you do not always do the same thing when you're a scientist. You grow with your science and what you learn. And so you can start with one discipline and start to get more and more into another. You're not stuck with one topic and one subject. You kind of are in charge of your own journey, which can be as varied as you want.
Where would you say that your journey is going next? Are you going to stick in the sort of vein that you're in? Do you have any upcoming projects that you're excited about?
Yes, I do actually. I think so. I've spent a lot of time reporting on how bad things are in conservation, nearly 20 plus years, looking at negative trends in biodiversity, in forest cover, in population, whatever it is. And so I got some years ago. I got really hooked with the concept of rewilding. So this idea that we can do more than just report the negative and think about people protecting what's left. We can actually rebuild, so bring it back. And so that's probably a topic that is on top of my priority right now, so much so that actually I edited the book on this. There's a good impetus in the UK and probably in many countries to try to be much more proactive about bringing back biodiversity, trying to think about how we bring it back, how we coexist with biodiversity, how we change a bit the way we interact with nature to have more nature. And so that I find it exciting because it touches one of the core principle of conservation, which is this: how do you get people and nature to work well together, to coexist well, but given that they are part of the same system. So I find that particularly exciting right now.
Brilliant. To finish off, I would like to know what advice, if someone was inspired by the work that you do and is interested in becoming a conservationist or biologist, what advice would you give somebody that wanted to kind of move into this field?
I'd say contact people, give it a go, and try those internships. So there's a lot of possibility to spend time during your summer holiday or through the school system to actually interact more directly with scientists. I wish I had that, then I would have known it before the long time it took me. But there are some really good programs in the UK in particular to try to, especially for people that are not well linked through the school or have issues really connecting with the scientific world. And there's programs that give you paid internship to try to spend time in institutes such as ours. So yeah, I think to try to get into that kind of career, the best is to start to network early and have a sense of what it entails early, because there is a lot of myth about what scientists should be or should learn to get into that profession, which do not always stand the test of reality. So you do not need to systematically take one path to get there. There's a lot of way to get to that final destination, and by having a practical experience within an institution, either through an internship or through a mentoring program, etc., actually give you that perception that you do not, that your profile will probably fit. The trick is to know how to best play your card, if it makes sense.
Yeah, someone once told me that the best way to look at it is that everybody is a unique combination of their kind of past experiences and what they've learned. And so everybody is a specialist at something in their own way, because no one else will have your background, but you just have to kind of get a foot in the door and seek out where your specialism can be applied. And there's probably lots of places within science that everyone's sort of background could help them.
Or even more than that, a lot of people are not conscious of their strengths. So they keep on looking at what they can't do, and then get really disappointed by not being able to do what they think they should do to get into that career. Well, in fact, you may have a completely different set of skills that are also strengths, because they are underrepresented or not really there in the community. And knowing that enable you to get a quicker access to that kind of career. So again, by having a sense of that community, how it works, and what are the way to enter it, it gives you this confidence to push yourself, because a lot of it is not an easy career to access to. There's a lot of steps to build a career in conservation, but it definitely helps having an idea about your strengths.
Yeah, definitely. Fantastic advice to end it on. Thank you so much for joining me today, Nathalie. That was really, really useful.